watching Minute to Skim It on the Experience. So, hello. All right, I've got lots of books to review for you guys today. And Hannah just basically showed up just the number ones and showed them to me, and I was like, "Oh, we have
just for the indies,
just for the indies." Yeah, I was like, "We have got a lot to do."
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Dan Wickline Show. I am your host, Rumpled Foreskin, and I'll be weaving these Spider-Man No Way Home cameos into theories into gold. That's right. You know, after months and months of speculation and casting leaks, we finally got the teaser trailer for the third Tom Holland-led Spider-Man film, and while it didn't answer questions like if Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield are coming back, we did get to see Alfred Molina de-aged as Doc Ock and a few other hints at familiar villains making their return to the big screen. And their entry into the MCU, of course. And while it may not seem like that long ago, some of these characters and actors we're talking about go back almost 20 years. You know, I mean, the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire was 2002. So we are at 19 years at this point since Willem Dafoe and Kirsten Dunst and all of them created the first Spider-Man universe. Now, this whole connecting to the current MCU Spider-Man with the 5 previous films all started at the end of Spider-Man Far From Home. That's when we saw J.K. Simmons pop up at the end as J. Jonah Jameson. Now, Simmons seems like he was born to play the character, and he originally did, starting back in 2002 in the initial Spider-Man movie, directed by Sam Raimi. In the film, Simmons plays Jameson as the flat-topped, cigar-smoking, loudmouth publisher of the Daily Bugle, the newspaper. Now, when Marvel Studios decided to bring the actor back in the iconic role, they didn't do the flat top, and I've heard different reasons why. One of them was that they did the cameo so quickly, they really didn't have time to set up a fitting for the hair and stuff, so they just went with Simmons as he was. But, you know, the character himself has changed. He become more of an Alex Jones-style video blogger. You know, a right-wing conservative talk show host type. And he was the one that released the doctored footage of Mysterio outing Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Now, it had been a long time since the iconic newspaper man had been on the screen, but fans knew his return was inevitable, just not necessarily by the same actor who had already moved on to play James Gordon in Zack Snyder's Justice League movie. So it surprised a lot of people when Simmons popped up on the screen. But having him back opened the door for fans to start hoping for some of the other characters from the previous films to return. Some of the iconic villains that make up Spider-Man's rogues gallery. And then things started getting weird. There was an exclusive report from the Hollywood Reporter on October 1st of 2020 that claimed Jamie Foxx would be returning as Electro. This was kind of a surprise because, well, his portrayal of Max Dillon in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 really wasn't that well received. In fact, it was probably the weakest aspect of a weak film. But no one can deny that Foxx is a good actor. I mean, the guy is really good. So the idea of getting him back for a second chance is kind of intriguing. Then 2 months later, Hollywood Reporter again said that Alfred Molina would strap on the mechanical arms to reprise his role of Dr. Otto Octavius from Spider-Man 2. Now, this could arguably be called the best Spider-Man film made, and Molina's portrayal of Doc Ock was universally loved. So they take the second Spider-Man movie and the second Amazing Spider-Man movie and pull the villains from it. That seemed interesting, but wasn't really sure what they were doing with that. But you bring back a character from each of the Spider-Man films with the original actors. This, of course, caused a huge amount of speculation on who else might come back. Names like Maguire and Garfield jumped into the top of the list, of course, partly because of the success of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, the idea of seeing 3 different Spider-Men on screen at the same time is intriguing. This also brought conversations about Kirsten Dunst and Emma Stone coming back as Mary Jane Watson and Gwen Stacy. And you can't talk about the previous Spider-Man film without bringing up the great Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, a.k.a. the Green Goblin. Now, the trailer confirmed Molina's return. And he's been talking about how his character would be the same one from the ending of Spider-Man 2. That was about to drown after destroying his own device. The trailer also showed us lightning strikes similar to Electro's, but in the more comic accurate yellow rather than the blue he had in Amazing Spider-Man 2. We also get what certainly sounded like Dafoe's laughter when, on the screen, and then we get the pumpkin bomb rolling out. So that seems like we're going to get Willem Dafoe back, but we also get a big dirt cloud that seems to be taking a shape, which similar to how Sandman worked in Spider-Man 3. And there's a quick glimpse of a very dark scene in which a clawed hand takes a strike at Peter. And this is a might. It could only, it's a long shot, but that could be the Lizard from the Amazing Spider-Man movie. With all these potential villains, we could be getting a multiverse version of Sinister Six, something Sony has been wanting to do for a very long time. They originally tried to set up a Sinister Six off of the Andrew Garfield films. There was even that closing credit scene where there's mysterious guy is walking through kind of a lab, and you see all the different, you see Vulture's wings and Rhino's suit, and you see all the different things to make the Sinister Six. So, and there's been there was a Drew Goddard film in the works for a long time of the Sinister Six. Drew Goddard, of course, was one of the writers, or I think he was the showrunner for the Daredevil series. So they've wanted to do a Sinister Six for a long time, but then Sony's wanted to expand the Spider-Man universe because that's the characters they have, And unlike Marvel that has all of these heroes to pull from, a lot of what Sony has to pull from are villains and anti-heroes. You got Black Cat, you got Venom and Carnage and Morbius, not normal heroes, not your normal, it's not Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. You get Spider-Man and all the people he's tried to beat up over the years, or vice versa, the ones who've tried to beat him up. So Sony has wanted to make a Sinister Six movie, and I could see them using this to kind of pull all of it together. Now, being that this is just a teaser trailer, we're likely to get at least one more trailer over the next few months, probably some few scenes, some behind-the-scenes stuff. There's no sense kind of continue to speculate who might appear, but I think it would be worthwhile to do a kind of a quick trip through the villains we've already met over the last 20 years that could appear in the film. And if they are trying to do Sinister Six, then maybe who would be the final member of the team? I mean, if we're looking at Electro and Doc Ock and Green Goblin, the Lizard, and Sandman, there's a sixth one. So we'll take a look at that. But before I get too deep into that, let me remind you guys that the lineup for the rest of today After our show here is going to be Comics Collectibles with Rex and John at 6 p.m. Eastern, and they have got a pretty good lineup. I've had a sneak peek at some of the books they're going to be offering, and in line with today's show, there is a copy of One More Day, Spider-Man 544, that is actually signed and remarked by Randy Emberlin. There's also a Ken Hazer remark of Captain America #1, signed and remarked. There's a signed Alex Ross signed Kirby Genesis #1 acetate cover. And if you're a Cullen Bunn fan, there is a Deadpool Illustrated #1 signed in red by Cullen Bunn. So there's some great books in tonight's show. So stay tuned after this for Rex and John as they go over some great collectibles. And then after that, we'll be kicking it with Henri and Kevin. That'll be at 8 p.m. Eastern. So you guys are going to want to stick around for that. Now, yeah, JD says Ken Hazer's art is incredible. Dude is so versatile. He is. He does a lot of remarks and books for Dynamic Forces and stuff, and all his stuff is great. And they go very quickly when they're on the show. So I've seen them be the top grab on different weeks and stuff. Okay. It's a live show. I don't think spelling counts at this point. So, all right, let's get into some of the villains. Now, I'm going to go through and break down all the villains we've seen in the different movies and stuff. And of course, we got to start off Spider-Man from 2002, which featured Dafoe as billionaire industrialist Norman Osborn, head of Oscorp Technologies, and, of course, father of Harry, played by James Franco. Now, I realize that Franco is kind of persona non grata right now, and probably for a long time. But he is in the film, so we do have to talk about him. Now, Harry, of course, is Peter's best friend. He's also dating Mary Jane at one point. So there's a lot going on here. Now, back with Norman, one of Oscorp's big projects, and this is interesting because, again, this is 2002, 6 years before Marvel even kicked off with Iron Man, and the project that Norman Osborn is working on is a super soldier serum for the military, which, of course, is the big thing for Marvel. Hulk was a super soldier serum. All these different characters are trying to recreate the super soldier serum. Well, that was what they started with in Spider-Man 2, or in the original Spider-Man movie. Now, there's a scene where the government comes in, a general comes in and asks about the project, and the scientist on it says it's not safe, it isn't working right, and the military then threatens to pull the funding on it. Well, Norman, like you do when you're a scientist or possible villain in a superhero movie, decides to take the formula himself. Now, I don't know why this continues to be a trope. It's a really bad idea. It never goes well. It's kind of like the idea of, hey, we're in this dark, scary place and we're teenagers. Why don't we have sex? I'm sure no one's going to try to come kill us. Yeah. Don't experiment on yourself if you're in a superhero movie. It never goes well. And you'll see as we continue through this list. Yeah. Now, Norman decides to expose himself to the formula. He gains super strength and agility, but he also goes slightly mad. Now, when he does, he also kills the scientist and escapes with 2 other Oscorp inventions, an exoskeleton and a jet glider. Now, I was always fascinated by this particular move because I was trying to figure out why the exoskeleton looked like the Green Goblin costume. I get the glider, But why did the military exoskeleton have the head of a demon or a goblin? Didn't that seem a little strange? Yeah, I realize I'm picking on a 20-year-old movie, but come on. They could have come up with a better explanation of that, but they just didn't. Well, he then uses these items to attack a rival company who's putting out a battle suit that might be, the military may go to that instead. Well, and while he's there, he also kills the general that threatened to take away the funding. So, problem solved. The rival corporation, which I think is called Quest, their battle suit is now thrown back. The general in charge is now dead. All the problems are solved, right? No, not for Norman, because the board of Oscorp decides to take a buyout offer from that same company. So Norman decides to kill everybody on the board. And of course, this is basically him developing a split personality, one of which being the Green Goblin. I'm like, no, I don't think Norman was that nice a guy in the first place, but sure. Now he's a murdering guy. Okay. Yeah. His action, well, and think back to Captain America, where Dr. Erskine tells Steve that the super soldier serum, good becomes better, bad becomes worse. Well, this is Norman. Now, his actions, of course, brought him into conflict with the new hero, Spider-Man, who he is able to deduce is his son's roommate. And he does this because of Thanksgiving. If I remember correctly, they basically have a battle right before he tries to kill him on his way to his son's house to have Thanksgiving dinner. And when Peter shows up and he's partly bleeding from the same area that Spider-Man was injured during their fight, Norman goes, ha ha, I know who it is. And of course, this changes everything. The Goblin then attacks Aunt May because that's how you do things. You attack an old woman. And putting her in the hospital, then he uses Mary Jane as a hostage. Another theme that carries throughout this whole set of films. And there's a fight against Spider-Man, but the tide turns and Peter starts beating Goblin severely until he removes his helmet, revealing his identity. And of course, this makes Peter stop long enough for Osborn to try and use his glider to kill Spider-Man. But old Spidey sense kick in and Peter hops over it and the glider impales itself on Osborn. And of course, Norman's final words are, Peter, don't tell Harry. Which just sets up a lot more problems in the future for Peter. Now, Jay Burns says, just hopped on. Are you talking about Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man? Love that movie. I am. What I'm doing is I'm kind of doing a review of all the villains that we've met so far over the years in Spider-Man, because which ones are going to pop back up in Spider-Man No Way Home, which one aren't, and what I think the possibilities are. So, yeah. Thanks for the heart, Jay. All right. Yeah. Oh, and please, if you guys are watching, hit the like buttons, the heart buttons, the care buttons, whatever it is. Those help us a lot. If you're on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. If you're on Twitch, those things, I would appreciate it greatly. So thank you. All right. Let's move on. We've got our second villain. Now, this is the biggie here because we've already seen him come back. Raimi and most of his crew returned in 2004 for Spider-Man 2, this time introducing us to Dr. Otto Octavius, played by Alfred Molina. Octavius is a scientist and mentor to Peter, and he's about to have a big breakthrough on a sustainable, I kept wanting to put a B in the wrong place, sustainable fusion power reactor. Now, this is also another trend where all the villains that Spider-Man goes up against are personally connected to him. So instead of Doc Ock just being a scientist out there, now he's a mentor to Peter. And it makes sense, but they kind of continue this every time we get a Spider-Man movie. Even in the newer ones, So he's got this big experiment he's doing. And to do the experiment, he has to, and the experiment is being funded by Oscorp, but now by his new head, Harry Osborn. To conduct the experiment, Octavius has to create a set of artificially intelligent mechanical arms that connect to his nervous system with an inhibitor chip to make sure they don't take over his brain. That right there should have been the warning sign. Don't hook something up to your body that could take over your brain. But he does anyway. And the experiment goes awry, like it does. And Spider-Man has to jump in and save the day. Now, Octavius is rushed to the hospital because the arms are fused to his back and the chip gets destroyed and they start messing with his mind. And, so the control over them was broken. The arms start killing the doctors who are trying to remove the... it is one of the scariest scenes in a Spider-Man movie when those arms start killing the doctors. Now, mind you, this experiment going horribly wrong also hurts Oscorp, which is now in some serious financial trouble because of this. So Harry's not very happy at Spider-Man. And we get the idea he's already not happy at Spider-Man, but now it's even worse. Now, well, Octavius, of course, breaks out of the hospital, and the arms are now thinking for themselves and influencing him. Well, Octavius wants to continue his experiment, so he robs a bank, which puts him in conflict with Spider-Man. But as it goes back and forth, Octavius escapes after, again, using Aunt May as a hostage situation. He escapes, and J. Jonah Jameson, of course, dubs him Doc Ock. There's a few names that come out. Doctor Strange is one of the ones that's mentioned, but they end up going with Doc Ock because Doctor Strange is already taken, according to Jonah, J. Jonah Jameson. Now, it turns out to finish his experiment, though, Octavius needs tritium, which is, I don't want to say it's a metal, but it's some kind of substance that Harry has access to. And he offers to exchange it if Doc will capture Spider-Man and bring him to Harry alive, because it turns out Harry wants to kill him. Harry thinks that Spider-Man killed his father. And I could see why he would make that assumption. But, Peter didn't tell him that his father was Green Goblin, which would have solved a lot of problems right there. But nope, he didn't. All right, so 2 is great, but the Peter subplot was a little similar to Superman 2. To me, a lot of ways, Spider-Man 2 was the same thing as Spider-Man 1. There's a lot of similar story beats and stuff. But, well, Octavius is true to his word, confronting Spider-Man, using Mary Jane as bait, and turning the unconscious hero over to Harry, who is stunned to learn that he's actually his best friend, Peter. Now, Peter, of course, convinces Harry to let him go so he can go save MJ and to stop Octavius from building another reactor, which will, again, blow up. So this leads to a fight in an abandoned warehouse on the docks, and Peter is able to bring Octavius back to his senses long enough for the scientist to realize the error of his ways and sacrifice himself while shutting down the fusion reactor. This is also when Mary Jane figures out that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, and they actually kind of get together finally, which is something we were all waiting for. It's kind of a nice, touching, heartfelt moment. And overall, Spider-Man 2 is a very good movie. I liked 1 better than 2 because I thought the story flowed better. I thought there was some bits of 2 that didn't work as well. But, and the beats were all the same. You had the crowd of New York back Spider-Man against the villain scenes, and and that was great in the train scene. But you got that same scene on the bridge, with them all throwing stuff at Green Goblin. You take on one with us New Yorkers. You take on one of us. You take on all of us. That line, So, but I thought Molina did a great job as Doc Ock. So again, glad to see him back. I think that's going to be probably the best part of the movie. Not so sure about some of the other casting choices or stuff, but I think if you're going to bring back Melina and you throw the pumpkin bomb, now we know the 3-part arc includes Harry becoming the new Goblin. I definitely don't think we're going to get James Franco back. That the pumpkin bomb isn't being thrown by him, because I just think he's a little too toxic right now. Plus, if you're going to bring back a Green Goblin, you bring back Willem Dafoe. You don't bring back James Franco. Again, might just be me, but that's my call on it. All right. Let's see. We're getting close to the halfway point here. I don't want to jump into the next one yet. So, hey, JD, why don't we go ahead and throw this to our commercial, and then we'll come back and pick it up with Spider-Man 3. So, be right back.
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of To Be Continued is a promise. A promise of adventure. A promise of excitement. A promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey. And behind every page there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop today. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
Today's comics market is ripe with new titles by creators who are determined to get their books into your hands. My name is Henri Compan. For the last decade, I've been making and selling my own creator-owned comics and dealing as a collector in live sales. My signature series, Yi Sun Shin, is the book that cannot be defeated in battle and has over 250,000 copies in print. Now I'm taking comics to the next level and laying the groundwork for my fellow creators to get their voices heard so they can connect directly with you. This is your chance to engage live with top comic book talent and get your comics signed without having to wait in long lines or pay any fees. But remember, we only have a limited amount of their books in stock. So always remember to call it as you see it.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We are talking about this Spider-Man villain that we have met over the last 20 years of cinema. And Jay here says, I always say Toby was a great Peter but not believable as Spider-Man. Andrew was an amazing, hot Spider-Man, but too cool as Peter, and Tom is a perfect mix, but the other two had better first movies. I agree with that assessment quite evenly, yeah. I really liked the first Spider-Man movie, the first Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, but I felt that it relied a little too heavily on Iron Man. I thought his connection was a little too much, where if I had to pick the best first Spider-Man movie of the three, I would go with Maguire's. I thought Tobey's was better. I agree that he probably wasn't the best Spider-Man, but he was a great Peter Parker. And yeah, Andrew Garfield played Peter way too cool. It just wasn't the right thing for it. And feel free to answer later, but how cool would it be if Raimi's Spider-Man 4, that they were going to have Bruce Campbell be revealed as Mysterio in a cameo? I had a different thought about that, because I'm looking at Doctor Strange, and he doesn't really seem to be acting a lot like Doctor Strange. And I know this is an absolute long shot, and it's more of a joke than anything, but could you imagine if Doctor Strange is actually Mephisto in disguise, and Mephisto is played by Bruce Campbell, which would then work well into the Doctor Strange movie with Bruce Campbell as Mephisto? That would be a lot of fun, and Sam Raimi's directing that. That's how I would do it, because we've already met Mysterio now. We've got a Mysterio, where I would love to have seen him as Mysterio in the past. But yeah, I would love that too. Bruce Campbell as Mephisto would be awesome. Not saying that Tobey was bad, Spidey, just not exactly how I thought should be. Yep, that makes a lot of sense to me too. So, all right, we are going to move on here to the third Spider-Man movie from Sam Raimi. But before we do, let me just remind you guys that we are having a cosplay contest right now with the experience, that if you want to share images of yourself in cosplay and use the hashtag Octothorpe, by the way, that is the real name of the hashtag symbol, pound the EXP cosplay. So it's all one word. Maybe JD can throw it up on the screen. But if you use that hashtag with your pictures, we will look out there for them on all the different social media, make a judgment, and I believe we're going to give away prizes. Yep. There's word of prizes. Yeah, Octothorpe. Octothorpe was created when the phone company created that symbol for the phone, and they named it Octothorpe as a combination of the fact that there's 8 points on it, and also the at the time Jim Thorpe was winning the Olympics, and the guys were so impressed by Jim Thorpe that they named it the Octothorpe. So that's the original name of the hashtag. Yeah, my brother refers to me as the largest warehouse of useless information in the world. So, all right, let's get back to the third Spider-Man film in the franchise. And it came with a lot of behind-the-scenes issues, because Sony wanted to feature the extremely popular character Venom, while director Raimi really didn't care about the more modern villains. He wanted to stick with the classic ones that he'd been doing. He had just done Green Goblin. He did Doc Ock. It would make sense to continue that vein, and he wanted to go with Sandman. Well, they argued, and eventually it got pushed together, and we ended up with both characters squeezed in, along with the final arc of Harry Osborn becoming the new Goblin. This, of course, made for an extremely bloated film that failed to properly highlight any of the characters. And I doubt we're going to get the new Goblin, like I said a few minutes ago. And I really don't see us getting the Topher Grace version of Venom. Not with the the Venom movies coming out. Sony's not going to want to bring that one back and really make it confusing. But Sandman, on the other hand, there's a chance we could end up with Thomas Hayden Church returning as Flint Marko, a.k.a. Sandman. This was definitely the best villain from the film, and while they tried to shoehorn his origin into another personal connection with Peter, like they did with all the other villains, basically what they did was they made him actually the person to shoot Uncle Ben. They also made him a redemptive character and the only villain to live in the trilogy, and I believe the only villain to live of any of the Spider-Man villains so far until Marvel Studios. So the previous Sony films, I think he's the only villain to live. Well, maybe Rhino. Yeah. Anyway, now the story, Marco escapes from prison and was on the run from the cops trying to make it back to home to see his daughter when he accidentally falls into a particle accelerator, like you do. And basically he's molecularly binded his DNA to that of sand, turning his entire body into a controllable sand particles. Now, Marco tries robbing an armored car. Not sure why, but I guess money for his daughter. I think she needs a surgery or operation or something because they needed that backstory. And again, these are pretty cliche origins, but you know, there were comic movies of the early 2000s. They didn't really go that in depth in storytelling. So now Marco tries robbing the armored car, like I said, but Spider-Man stops him and Marco escapes. Then Peter is then told Marco's connection to Uncle Ben's death, leaving Peter both angry and guilty for the death of Marco's accomplice because he thought that had been the guy to kill Uncle Ben, but now it's that he wasn't. And at the same time, Peter finds this black alien suit that enhances his abilities and makes him a tad more aggressive and a really bad dancer. Now, they fight again a second time, and Peter really gets aggressive and starts beating the crap out of him and ends up like dispersing him in water all over the place. And it takes Marco a while to reform, but Peter starts realizing that the suit isn't good for him, and he breaks free of it using the bells and sound stuff, breaks free of the symbiote, who then bonds to Eddie Brock, a rival photographer. Now, this ends up bringing us to, and all this while we're seeing Harry Osborn out there attacking him as the new Goblin. And of course, because Harry is his friend, the spider signal isn't going, or the spider tingle, the Peter tingle, his spider senses aren't really going off. So you end up with this four-way battle between Venom, Sandman, the new Goblin, and Spider-Man, all while, get this, Mary Jane is being held hostage. Now, Harry switches sides and helps Peter defeat Sandman and Venom, and they end up saving MJ, but in the end, both Harry and Eddie Brock are dead. Now, they wrap up the film with Marco discovering that Peter's identity and his connection to Ben, and we see that he had never intended to shoot Ben, that he was having a conversation, and Ben was actually kind of talking him down when the accomplice ran up, startled Flint Marco, and he ended up firing, killing Ben. So it was an accident, and he's felt guilty about it ever since. Now, Peter believes him, and Marco then shifts into sand and blows off in the breeze, making him, like I said, the only the villain to get out alive. You know, I mean, we talk about Spider-Man, he's such a good character and stuff, but all his villains are dying. So it's almost like he's a serial killer at this point. Now, of course, that movie did not do well. People kind of universally hated it. It was not well received. It ended up killing the fourth movie in the franchise, and Sony tucked Spider-Man away for about 5 years and then handed it over to Mark Webb, who may have the most appropriate name ever for a director for Spider-Man. Now, he brought in Andrew Garfield as Peter, Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy, and he introduced the world to Kirk Connors, a.k.a. the Lizard, played by Rhys Ifans. Now, they had a Dr. Connors in the Sam Raimi films, played by Dylan Baker, but he was more of an Easter egg. He never really did that much. You know, they had some scenes with him, he had some dialogue, but they never got around to him becoming the Lizard. So the new take on Spidey spent a lot of time with this weird secret backstory about his parents and how they might have been like agents or doing experiments and stuff. And of course, they make that personal tie again because Kirk Connors was Richard Parker's partner on their experiments at Oscorp. Connors is a biologist, and they're working on combining human and animal DNA to improve health. And the side part of it was he wanted to be able to regrow limbs with the fact that he had lost his arm. So that was kind of the whole point of his experiment, was to help himself, which, yeah, is never a good sign. But that was, you know, so he was friends with Peter. He was like an uncle to him and stuff like that. So again, you've got this personal connection to the villain. Now, there's another trope here we're going to get to. The head of Oscorp comes, with Parker gone, the head of Oscorp, of course, comes to Connor and tries to force him into doing human testing. Like, we need to move forward on this. And you get the idea that maybe Richard Parker was killed because he wouldn't move forward. Well, Connors gets fired, and he does the Norman Osborn desperate scientist move of experimenting on himself. We talked about this a little while ago. It's not a good idea. Well, of course, he grows back that limb. It is awesome. He gets his limb back. But then the formula kind of keeps going further, and his skin starts turning scaly, and he spouts claws from his fingers, and he completely transforms into a giant lizard. And he's a little mad at the guy that fired him, so he attacks him on the bridge and starts throwing cars around, and the new Spider-Man shows up trying to stop him and using his webbing to catch cars. And while all this is happening, the lizard gets away. Now, the lizard escapes into the sewers and reverts back to Connors, and both, they kind of discover each other's identities. You know, Peter figures out it's Kurt Connors, and Connors figures out it's Peter Parker, that's Spider-Man, which leads to them fighting kind of several times, with the final one involving the police. Now, of course, Peter's girlfriend in this one is Gwen Stacy. Gwen's father is Captain George Stacy, who doesn't like Peter, gives Peter a lot of grief. Well, the two of them have to kind of team up against the lizard at the end. And of course, the lizard's big plan is to release like an aerosol version of the formula that will turn everybody into people like him. Yeah. Well, as Spider-Man and Stacy, again, like I said, they step up to stop him. And of course, Captain Stacy is killed. And last thing he tells Peter, now that he knows he's Spider-Man, is, stay away from my daughter. You're just going to be dangerous to her. Which he completely ignores, by the way. And we see what happens in the next movie. Let's see. All of Oscorp's projects were aimed at saving the weird green whiskery Norman in those movies. Yeah. That's true, but I don't know if we met Dane DeHaan yet. I thought he was in 2. Was he in the first one? Anyway, well, Connors gets reverted back and is actually dropped into a psychiatric hospital, where they come in and they go, did you tell Peter about his father and all this other stuff? So you get this more ominous behind the scene things going on. But yeah, Lizard is left in Ravencroft at the end. So in a psychiatric hospital, and we kind of get the idea that he might still turn into the Lizard again. So, all right. Now, we got one more film to talk about, but before, let me just remind you one more time, we're at the quarter hour here, that Comic Collectibles with Rex and John starts at 6 p.m. Eastern, and Kicking It with Andre and Kevin are at 8 p.m. Eastern, and of course, you are watching it, the Dan Wickline Show, here on The Experience. Please hit like and subscribe, and tell your friends about the show so they can come and join in on the conversation. All right. 2014. This is where it gets really interesting. Webb returns with another go with the wall crawler, this time bringing a handful of villains. They give us Felicity Jones playing Felicia Hardy, or we're supposed to believe she's Felicia Hardy, but they didn't really do anything with her as Black Cat. Paul Giamatti is introduced as Alexei Setsevich, who will eventually become the Rhino, and it's absolutely horrible. He just ends up in a big armored suit at the end, yelling profanities and stuff. I mean, it's such a waste of A, a really good actor, and B, a good character. So I don't know what they were doing with that. We get introduced to Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn, and we see him as he's got this disease he's trying to take care of and stuff. But we watch him kind of morph into another version of the Green Goblin. But I can't see them choosing this version of this character over Defoe either, or even the James Franco, which leaves the only real villain to pull from this film being Jamie Foxx as Max Dillon, aka Electro. Now, that's why when they announced that Jamie Foxx was coming back, I was a little hesitant, because they went over the top with this character, making him a lonely loser type. You know, they did the bad comb over. They did the, sad that nobody remembered his birthday thing. I mean, they went heavy-handed on this character, making him a cliche, and then I guess one day he runs into Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's is kind to him. And, of course, he becomes obsessed with Spider-Man at that point, thinking that he's, really his buddy and stuff like that. Well, he's working at probably Oscorp. I don't remember now. But he's probably working at Oscorp, and he's cleaning up, and he's trying to fix these electrical cables, and ends up getting shocked, and he falls into a vat of electric eels and chemicals. And he comes out of the vat, and his skin flakes off, and we see this electric, like, blue skin underneath, and it's all charged with energy, and he gains the power to manipulate energy, and, of course, decides to use it to go after society. Yeah. It's what you do as a bad guy, I guess. Oh, I have power now, I'm going to bring you down. And he ends up going to Times Square, because it's like the biggest use of energy, and he's draining energy from everybody, and ends up seeing a cop tries to stop him, and he attacks the cop. And of course, Spider-Man arrives, and Max is excited until he can't remember Max's name or even recognize Max. So this upsets him. They get into this big fight, and Spider-Man eventually wins. But it's not an easy battle. He's definitely got problems taking on electricity. And Dillon is taken to Ravencroft, where he's experimented on. And then eventually, when he gets out, he ends up teaming with Harry Osborn against Oscorp in exchange for him getting access to Oscorp's power grid. Now, Gwen Stacy plays a big part here in the showdown between them. She shows Peter how to magnetize his web shooters so that they'll actually work on Electro. Also, she goes down to help and overrides the switch, causing a massive feedback of energy, which makes Electro explode. Now, this, of course, isn't the end of the movie. Harry Osborn shows up as Green Goblin, and we get the death of Gwen Stacy. So it's not a very happy ending to a movie, and it's not a happy ending to this franchise either, because it does not go over well. This is considered as big, if not bigger, of a train wreck as Spider-Man 3. So, interesting. if you think about it, of all the characters they introduced, all the villains, the only two that didn't figure out that Peter Parker was Spider-Man are Electro and Rhino. Everybody else figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And again, that continues in the new thing. Adrian Toomes figures it out. Mysterio figures that out. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But we get these characters that are all figuring it out. Too many villains in that one for me. Yeah, that's the problem. And Spider-Man 3 was the same way. They put too many villains in. Well, we're about to get a whole bunch in Spider-Man No Way Home, but I think it's going to be handled differently. So, now those are all the villains from the previous Spider-Man movies, and it looks like most of them could be making their way into the MCU for this Christmas. But if they're doing a version of the Sinister Six, they are short at least one. To be fair, Skrull Fury told Mysterio that Peter was Spider-Man. That's true. That is absolutely true. So, but we are short one. So if we got Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Electro, Sandman, and the Lizard, that's only 5. So who could they bring back to be number 6? They could bring back Michael Keaton as Adrian Toomes, the Vulture. I think that would be great, and he's one of the original Sinister Six. They could bring back Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio. Yeah, he's dead, but all of these other characters are too. But some rumors say that Rhino is going to be the 6th one, but God, I hope not. At least not Paul Giamatti in that weird robotic armor thing. That was horrible. Please don't do that. Now, we do have a couple of villains that are minor ones in the first Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Homecoming. We had Bokeem Woodbine as the Shocker, so he could be back. Or we get teased Mac Gargan, played by Michael Mando, who eventually becomes a Scorpion. So those are 2 more that could be pulled from. But, I mean, when you really think about it, over the last 20 years, Sony has introduced us to an absolute ton of villains. And that's not even counting their spin-off properties like Venom and Morbius, plus the upcoming Kraven and Shriek and Carnage. And it's really kind of impressive that they really could do just about anything in Spider-Man No Way Home. They could bring any of these characters in. So now Jay says not having that payoff in The Amazing Spider-Man for Sinister Six was rough. Really wanted to see what they were going to do. And I agree. And they were going with a very grounded version of the Sinister Six. That's why Paul Giamatti was in a suit of armor instead of just gray rhino hide. And, we got to see Vulture's wings and stuff like that, but they never really paid that off. And I think we're going to get a version of the Sinister Six here. But like I said, I don't know who... I don't think they may not actually act as the Sinister Six. It may just be kind of in theory type of thing. Because I don't know if it's going to be that big. I mean, there's a lot going on in Spider-Man No Way Home for them to really showcase all of these villains. But pulling them from the other movies is kind of a shortcut. They don't really have to explain them. And that's kind of how they did it in Spider-Man No Way Home, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, is we get, this is another Spider-Man. This is Noir Spider-Man. We get the 2-second opening, and that's it. Well, we know that Michael Keaton is playing Adrian Toomes in the Morbius movie, because, he's even admitted that. So, but yeah, they're never gonna. They don't give it that early, But Vulture coming back. Yeah. I think he'll be over there. I don't think he'll be in this movie. But I love that character. So I thought he did a really good job. Hey, Formal Foundation. How you doing? Is that a drama mask? Or that's cool. I like that. So that is pretty much all the villains, though, that we're looking at. I mean, they could even introduce a brand new one if they wanted to. There's a lot more Spider-Man villains. I mean, in DC, you've got Batman and Flash with the two giant rogues galleries, but in Marvel, it's Spider-Man. He's got all the villains. The only one close would be Captain America, and that, we're getting a lot of Captain America's villains in MCU, but it's not even close. All right, Formal says, so in this segment, I would like to present something to you, and you let me know on a scale of 1 to 10 how scary this is. Is that okay? I'm not sure where you're going with this. Really would love them to use Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. Kingpin, that would be great. I would love to see Vincent D'Onofrio, but he doesn't really fit. He's not really a physical. He is a physical threat, but I don't think of him that way. I think of him as the criminal overlord guy. So, Formal, I'm sorry, we've got maybe a minute left in the episode. So this might have to wait for our next show, which will be tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, where we will go over that incredible Marvel What If episode that aired this morning. And if you guys haven't seen it, wow, that episode. As much fun as the first two were, this one is a neat mystery, and it's really a takeoff of Fury's big week. So get a chance, watch it, come back tomorrow to the Dan Wickline Show, and we'll talk about it. Formal says, I think Kingpin would be more Daredevil, come in, support Peter, and just before closing the case, Kingpin walks in with a docket of evidence. All right. That's a possibility. Thank you, Jay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Marvel Zombie one, too. I'm not a really big zombie fan, but it should be interesting to see what that is. All right, folks. Going to wrap it up here. Remember, stick around for Comics Collectibles with Rex and John starting in about 20 seconds, so stay tuned.